Your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They preferred to put you to work on a farm or at the mills so as to have a little more money. The teacher, Hamel, tells his student that you are not the only person to be responsible for this. You are not the only person who is not responsible for learning French. Your parents also were not worried. They never thought that you should learn enough. They wanted you to work on a farm or at the mills so that they can earn a little more money. And I have been to blame also. Not only them, even I am also responsible. Have I not often sent you to water my plants, flowers, instead of learning your lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? And I am also to be blamed because I have sometimes sent you to water my flowers. So I asked you to work in my garden instead of learning lessons. When I wanted to go fishing, I have given you a holiday. So whom to blame? And he feels that it's not only the student to be blamed, it's everybody, parents, teachers, everybody. So there's a kind of guilt consciousness in teacher. He feels that whenever he had asked the children to water, probably felt they missed their class. They should have learned during that time. Here the teacher is telling out of love for French language. He is telling out of the patriotism. He knows that it's going to be the last lesson. And German is imposed on these people. Then from one thing to another, young Hamel went on to talk of the French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world. Now young Hamel is overwhelmed with emotions. And here we can see the feeling that he has got for French language, love that he has got for French language. And he feels that it was the most beautiful language in the world. The French teacher Yam Hamel praises his mother tongue. And he says that French language is the most beautiful language in the world. The clearest, the most logical, that we must guard it among us and never forget it. Because when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. People are enslaved as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. First of all, he says, French is the most beautiful language. Then he says, it is the clearest. Clarity is there in this language. The most logical. The logic is there, the most logical language. And he says, we have to guard it. We have to safeguard this language. How can we guard it? We should use that language. We have to communicate in this language. We should never forget that language. What is the significance of the language? What is the significance of one's mother tongue? It binds you together. The language unifies people together. It's the one bond that is created by language. It's the nationalism that is created by the language. It is not linguistic chauvinism that we see here. French people are the victims of linguistic chauvinism. German is imposed upon these people. Germans have shown their linguistic chauvinism. When one feels pride in one's language, when one feels superiority of his language and disregards other languages, that is what is linguistic chauvinism. Hamel says, people are enslaved as long as they hold fast to their language. It is as if they had the key to their prison. When you forget your language, when you are not able to safeguard your language, then people are enslaved. And till the time you stick to your language, you communicate in your language, till the time you guard your language, it is the key to open the prisons and to come out. It is a key to escape from the prison of slavery. So what Hamel has done here? He has praised his mother tongue. French language as being the most beautiful, clearest and most logical language in the world. He tells the whole class to guard their language as it is the only way to free oneself from the prison of slavery. If a person knows his mother tongue well, no one can enslave him. Knowing the mother tongue well as a language is a tool to fight domination. Then he opened a grammar, read us our lesson. Then he started grammar lessons. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. When you are keen to learn, you will understand everything. And now we can see the keenness in France. Why he didn't understand earlier the participles? Because he was not keen. He wanted to bunk the class. He wanted to remain outside. He wanted to enjoy the beauty of the nature. But now there's a keenness because he knows that it's going to be the last lesson. And it's going to be the last class in his mother tongue. And he's going to miss the teacher too. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. When you concentrate, when you focus, when there's a keenness, when there's interest, then definitely everything becomes easy. And when it is difficult, when you are not very keen to learn. I had never listened so carefully, and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. Here the narrator says that he had listened to him very carefully, and not only that, even the teacher, M. Hamel, had explained with lot of patience. It seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away and to put it all into our heads at one stroke. It was the last day for him and he was teaching the last lesson. And he wanted to give all the knowledge that he had to all his students. And he wanted to put all that knowledge into their heads at once. After the grammar, we had a lesson in writing. That day, young Hamel had new copies for us, written in a beautiful round hand. France, Alsace, France, Alsace. They had a grammar lesson, and after that, he took up a lesson in writing. So in order to improve the writing skills, he had taken up that lesson, and here he had brought with him new notebooks. And in those new notebooks, what was written beautifully was France, Alsace, France, Alsace. It was meant for their tracing. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolrooms. So those notebooks looked like flags. It was very symbolic of the France, because France, Alsace, that is what was written there, hung from the rod at the top of our desk. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work. So everybody was working very, very sincerely, and how quiet it was. The classroom was quiet. The only sound was the scratching of the pens over the paper. The sound that was there only of their writing. Otherwise, there was no sound at all. Everybody was writing sincerely and seriously. Once some beetles flew in. The insects came inside. Nobody paid attention to that. Not even the littlest ones who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that was French too. On the roof, the pigeons cooked very slow, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? Now here, the French people are imposed with German language, and they are treated like animals. And here he refers to them. Pigeons, birds. He says, will they force the pigeons to coo in German language, to sing in German language? Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw young Hamel sitting motionless in a chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. So whenever he looked up from his writing, and all others were also busy in writing, it was a lesson on writing. And at that time, he saw M. Hamel sitting without any movement, sitting quietly in a chair, and looking at one thing, then at another inside the classroom, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. That means he was engrossed in his thought. He was just thinking that this room, which was a part of his life for 40 years, is going to leave. Fancy, imagine. For 40 years he had been there in the same place. He had put up service of 40 years as a French teacher, with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. Only the desks and benches had been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hopvine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. The narrator is explaining, when the children are busy in writing, when the lesson on writing is going on, the teacher is sitting quietly on the chair, and he is looking at each and everything there, one after the other. And at that time, the writer feels only the desks and benches had been worn out over the period, but he has remained there for 40 years. He has not changed himself. The walnut trees in the garden, they have grown taller. The hopvine, the creeper that he had planted himself, that has twined about the windows to the roof. The nature has changed, but he has remained there. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all, poor man. He was feeling pity on him. And how he must have felt broken, heartbroken, because he had to leave. He was forced to leave, to hear his sister moving about in the room above. So upstairs, his sister was packing their things, packing their trunks, for they must leave the country next day. All the French teachers were asked to leave, they were forced to leave, and they had to leave. This country, one time, it was theirs. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. But he had the courage. He wanted to listen to each one of his students. After the writing, we had a lesson in history. So first he started with grammar, then he came to writing, then he started a lesson in history. And then the baby chanted there, ba, be, be, bo, boo. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his spectacles. Now Hauser was wearing spectacles and holding his primer in both hands spelled the letters with them. So he wanted to learn. Though he was an old man, he was there holding his primer, holding the basic reader and spelling the letters. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion. So Hauser feels emotion, emotional over this. And it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. This old man crying. The narrator is a small child and he is not aware why is he crying. Actually, it's out of the love for the country he was crying. The country had gone into the hands of the Germans. It was so funny to hear him. Now here, when he was watching him to cry, he wanted to laugh. Ah, how well I remember it, that last lesson. And each word of that last lesson, the writer remembers, the narrator remembers. All at once the church clock struck 12. So it was at 12 o'clock. Then the Angelus, then it was time for prayer. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Persians returning from drill sounded under our windows. And at that particular moment, when it was 12 o'clock, the trumpets of the Persians sounded. And they were returning from drill. So it was a time for them to return from drill. M. Hamel stood up, very pale, without any expression in his chair. I never saw him look so tall, so probably he was feeling proud of him. My friends, said he, I, but something choked him. He was totally emotional. He was emotionally choked. He was not able to speak. He could not go on. He was overwhelmed with emotions. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could, Vive la France. That means, long live France. Then he has turned to the board, and on the blackboard he wrote, Vive la France. What does it mean? It means that long live France. He was not able to speak, and therefore on the blackboard he wrote. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall. And without a word, he made a gesture to us with his hand. He was very sad. And he leaned against the wall. That means he was not able to stand properly too. He was not able to bear all that. And he just gestures to all those who were attending the class. School is dismissed, you may go. He just gestures for dispersal.